Welcome to Books on Point. The Pink Line follows protagonists from 9 countries all over the globe to tell the story of how LGBT rights became one of the world's new human rights frontiers in the second decade of the 21st century. From refugees in South Africa to activists in Egypt, transgender women in Russia and transitioning teens in the American Midwest, the Pink Line folds intimate, deeply affecting stories of individuals, families, communities into a definitive account of how the world has changed so dramatically in just a decade. To talk to us a little bit more about the book, we're joined by the author Mark Gavissa, to basically give us some insight as to how the book was put together. Mark, thank you so much for your time.
It's wonderful to be with you. Thank you for having me.
So perhaps we can start off by explaining the Pink Line. How should viewers interpret and understand it?
Sure. So the idea for this book came to me in 2009, which was the year that my husband and I got married in South Africa. South Africa, of course, famously being the first country in the world to make discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation illegal in its constitution in 1996, and only the 5th country in the world to legalize same-sex marriage. But the same year that my husband and I got married, which enabled me to get the spousal benefits in his job and to travel with him to Paris, there was another couple I read about in Malawi, Tiwonga Chimbalanga and Stephen Montjeza, who held a public engagement ceremony. And as a result of this public engagement ceremony, they were prosecuted for carnal knowledge against the order of nature, because homosexuality is a crime in Malawi, and they were sentenced to 14 years hard labor in prison. And this got me thinking about how there was a new pink line being drawn across the world in our era, in the 21st century, describing and defining and dividing the world in a whole new way, in ways that were unimaginable to me when I came out in my early 20s in the 1980s. And so much of this Pink Line is about a new human rights frontier being established on the rights of LGBTQ people. And this line being defended and fought over in different ways in different parts of the world. I wanted to understand what the consequences of this new human rights battle were, not only in places where we understand LGBTQ rights to be acceptable, such as the West, but in other parts of the world too. So my book really is global. I moved from Cape Town, where I write about Tiwonga Chimbalanga, the Malawian, who came to Cape Town seeking asylum. I move up to Kenya, to Egypt, and then outwards to the world.
Let's discuss the process of putting and researching this book. I mean, how long did it take? And the individual stories, what made you decide on taking that approach?
You know, I've always, as I'm sure many of your listeners will know, one of my previous books was a biography of Thabo Mbeki, The Dream Deferred. And before that, I wrote a political profile column in the Mail and Guardian. I've always believed that the best way of understanding change in the world, political change, social change, is by, as a journalist, as an author, sitting on the shoulder of somebody negotiating that change and seeing how they negotiate the change, seeing how the change impacts on them and on how they impact on the change. So I knew from the beginning that I didn't just want to write about big ideas, that I wanted to tell stories about people moving through this rapidly changing world. And I wanted to tell stories because I believe it's the best way of communicating how change happens, but also because I know that readers really connect to stories about other people. So the book took me 7 years, and I was very fortunate to have a grant that allowed me to travel all over the world in the beginning and find the places and find the stories that I felt were most compelling, that most compellingly kind of gave a sense of what it meant to live on the Pink Line, to be a transgender person or a lesbian woman or a gay man, kind of negotiating all these issues as their identity became so politicized in different places.
The aspects of the U.S. that have changed in the sense when it relates to the conservative view that I suppose religious authorities have had on LGBT rights and communities. And the one thing you mention in the book is that battle, for lack of a better description, seems to have moved from the West, where they've lost it, to now trying to move it to already on the African continent by bringing in, conservative countries to be part of this new way of dealing with the issue. Tell me about that, and perhaps you can explain it a little bit better for our viewers.
Yeah. No, you've picked up something very important. I'm so glad you mentioned it. So basically, for the last 40 or 50 years, the religious right wing in the United States has looked for ways to fight what we could call a culture wars, to set themselves up against the sort of the liberalism of the Democratic Party, of a society that was becoming more secular and sort of more removed from conservative, quote-unquote, family values. And for many, many years, this was a fight against gay rights and against gay marriage. Now, that fight has been well and truly lost in the United States. Same-sex marriage is legal all over the United States. If you do opinion polls in the United States, most Americans believe that gay people should have the rights as any other person. When this started happening, the Christian evangelical right wing in the United States needed to look for other places to fight its battle. And they found a really powerful alliance with conservative right-wing Christians in Southern Africa and in East Africa, particularly, and specifically in countries like Uganda, Zambia, Malawi, where there were regional politicians who wanted to become more powerful politically, and were using this rather hateful interpretation of Christian ideology, the interpretation that homosexuals are not just sinners, but that they should be damned and thrown into jail.
Mark, unfortunately, we're running out of time. I'm going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Really a book worth getting that is titled The Pink Line, Mark Kobisa, showing it right there on screen. So thank you so much for tuning in to Books on Point. I'll be back next week with The Alternative Investor. We'll have more news with Nompumelelo Siziba at the top of the hour. Goodbye.